question I have for you. What does it mean to be a conservative in the post-9/11 America? More specifically, how do conservatives reach a balance between wartime spending, a balanced budget, and expanding the economy through tax cuts?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question because I think in a lot of ways, conservatism has to keep its same meaning over time. Otherwise, it's not conservatism. Was it Lincoln who defined conservatism as adherence on the old and tried against the new and untried? And so I think, in many respects, at least philosophical political conservatism remains perfectly intact in the post-9/11 world. The problem, and this is confirmed by conservative insights over the last 100 years, is that in war, governments get bigger. And we have been seeing that now. And I think a lot of conservatives have been somewhat irresponsible in not holding Bush to keeping spending down and all of the rest. It's part of what I'm going to talk about tonight, but part of the problem with Bush is that he always made it clear from the beginning that compassionate conservatism wasn't traditional conservatism. He was sort of bebopping and scatting off of traditional conservatives, saying, those are the bad guys, I'm different, I'm better, I'm compassionate, which was in many ways a slander against conservatism, traditional conservatism. And we've now seen all the problems that brings with it. I'm all in favor of more spending on defense, but what we've seen is spending across the board. It's been irresponsible, and you get some of that as the result of having a unified control of government, which conservatives long dreamed of, and when they finally got it, they got bitten in the ass by it. And but on national security, I think conservatives. I think national security is actually becoming, like it was in the Cold War, a defining issue that unites the disparate groups in the conservative movement. What I would like to see is more of the sort of libertarian antibodies being generated, and I think we're actually seeing a lot of that in these primaries.
Great. So shifting then to the Democrats, last year you said that the Democratic Party was a McGovernite party. Mm-hmm. What are the ideological parallels between McGovern and the current crop of Democratic presidential candidates?
Well, what I meant by McGovernite was not that all Democrats have a big overbite. I meant that they echo the McGovern isolationism, the come home America isolationism, which I think is grotesquely irresponsible intellectually, politically, and in all other ways. Probably the only good idea that liberals had when it comes to foreign policy in the 1990s was this idea of nation building. And there are problems with the idea of nation building, but it was their idea. They defended it. They fought for it. They took it seriously. And lo and behold, the first real test of it, when it's actually nation building in America's national interest rather than just some sort of hobby in Haiti or in Kosovo, the Democrats abandon it like a hot rock. They just drop it. And when John Kerry talked about how outrageous it was that we were opening fire departments in Baghdad while closing them in the United States. First of all, I think John Kerry is a very stupid person, but it was a morally repugnant stance to take because it left out the possibility that maybe Baghdad needed fire departments more than the United States did, and it was a real naked populist appeal to a kind of left-wing isolationism. And now that movement, that branch of the liberal mind in the Democratic Party basically controls the party. It's controlling the primary process. And it's very difficult for any of these candidates to get escape velocity from the gravitational pull of this isolationist bent. And look, if liberalism isn't going to stand for freedom in the world anymore, what use is it? And even Hillary Clinton, who I think is probably on foreign policy the most responsible of the entire Democratic field, she is constantly being pulled further and further to the left. And this effort at timetables and benchmarks and all that, and benchmarks you can have an argument about, but the timetable stuff, the clamoring for withdrawal, Harry Reid saying the war is lost, saying that he doesn't care if General Petraeus comes and says there's good news or there's progress. He says he just won't believe him, basically saying Petraeus will be lying if he says anything but bad news. This is profoundly childlike and narcissistic and self-indulgent. and bad for the country. And it is fairly unprecedented to have the leadership of a major American party racing for what will indisputably be seen, at least abroad, as surrender. So in that sense, I mean, I don't think you could say any one candidate is the McGovern in this race, although John Edwards is probably the most eager for that mantle. But the ghost of McGovern, even though I guess he's not dead, is occupying, I think, all of them to a certain extent.
So then, how would you rate the performance of the Republican minority during the first few months of the Democrat-controlled Congress as all this is going on?
I think it's been pretty good. I think that you have a problem for Republicans is that they know what they have to do is stay out of the limelight for a little while. I mean, just as a purely strategic political matter, they have to pick and choose their fights pretty carefully because people were legitimately pissed off with the Republican Party. I mean, I think disgusted is a good word for it, and for the most part, rightly so. I mean, the Republicans really blew it in the last 5 years, and so what they want to do is let the Democrats, define themselves, and then only pop their heads up every now and then to help with that definition. And so, I think in terms of fighting on the funding for the war, I think they've done very, very good. But they didn't want to seem like obstructionists on that first 100 hours stuff, and they shouldn't have, as a crass political matter. Nothing that the Democrats really did in that first 100 hours was that bad. I mean, some of it was stupid, and it's going to come and bite them in the butt down the road. But none of it was the kind of thing that Republicans needed to get in the way of when the American people didn't want to hear from Republicans for a little while. And now the Republicans have this wonderful luxury of being in the opposition. Conservatives, the opposition is sort of a natural home for the Conservative Party because we're the ones who say no. And since they proved that being in power they stopped sort of being all that conservative, I don't mind it that much as long as they keep the Democrats from making the worst mistakes possible. So.
Great.